So we're here about midday at my latitude, and I set up these two rings. And I set this one up yesterday, and I had first set it up like this. And I thought, well, look at that interesting shadow. Now I have it angled to my latitude, that's why it's angled. So I thought, I'm wondering now if this shadow here will keep shrinking to disappear on the equinox. So, but then after I got it set up, I thought, well, I don't think I have it facing the right way. And then I set it up like this. And even though it still has an interesting shadow, and I could really tell it was midday, because the shadow was just dead on. The morning is over here, and so it will move, and then in the evening it'll be on this other side. But so what will this shadow look like on the equinox? So this is what I'm watching. This is a new little project. I've never done this before. I was watching these two shadows and seeing, I had saw a similar sundial sort of thing online, and I've been wanting to do this for a couple years. I had these two rings and just kind of threw this together, measured my angle, and now watching what these two shadows do. So that's what I'm doing right now with these two rings. And so we'll watch and see if that starts to shrink down. Today is the 18th, so we have 19th, 20th, so we have 4 more days before the equinox celestial event is supposed to happen. Today is Yom Teruah, so I want to wish everybody happy Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month. Yesterday was the 91st day of the 2nd quarter, and so we marked the table yesterday. The intercalary day we marked, and now we're marking today. And this is still our spring equinox mark. Here we were at midday today. This is my mark for midday. And we're purpled. I know purple and blue is hard to see on this bright table for on this camera. But so this is purple today, then we were blue, and then we were green. So this is a day we haven't quite got up to the same mark as we saw in the spring, and we did still kind of see, you can still see a curve as it's flattening out. And that's one thing I wanted to point out. I know some people who watch shadows, they think they can run out at midday and say, oh yes, this line is straight or this line is not straight. And as we are getting closer and closer to the straight line, you can see how the middle is flattening out. And if we were just taking a snapshot from this side to this side, just our midday point, we could see at the solstice, at the summer solstice, that it was quite bent. But as we start getting up here in the equinox, how straight it is at the midday point. So we can't just look at midday, because it's not till we start in the morning and then we taper off in the evening that we start to really see the bend. Just this small snapshot isn't enough. So it's so important to watch from the morning to the evening, this shadow. And we can obviously see a bend when we get the whole picture, but when we just get this little snapshot, it's not really telling us for sure that it's the straight line, because that could be interpreted there in any way because it all looks straight. So we just continue watching until we have our straight line. And then what we do is we count the days from the 91st day of the 2nd quarter, which Enoch tells us to start counting off from the gate, from the great gate. We start counting our quarters off. In the spring, we have 90 plus 1, 90 plus 1, and yesterday was that plus 1 day of the 2nd quarter. And then we'll count how many days until we get to the actual event, the celestial event of the equinox, and however many days were between those will tell us whether it was a leap year or a regular year. A regular year will have 5 days. A leap year will have 6. And that's how that works. So 5 or 6 days, and that's what we're watching for this time of year. This is just one of the cogs that Enoch describes. Now, if we were just following the biblical account, all we need to do is watch for the straight line in the spring and then count. And we're given the count throughout scriptures of we count 10 days to get the lamb, 14 days to Passover, and so on. And so we make those counts. But what we're doing in the fall is making sure if we're in a regular year or in a leap year. Okay, so I'm going to just go over the nuts and bolts of the Creator's timekeeping system. He uses a two-wheel system. And actually, many people have studied this, and there's a gentleman named James D. Dwyer who was a computer systems programmer for the USGS, and he's also an author of Time, a count of 360 days. And he states that this form of timekeeping is accurate up to 2 seconds. This timekeeping way of our Creator is perfect. And this is what Enoch describes in his book on how to keep our Creator's time. So let me see if I can just quickly give you the nuts and bolts of it. So it's a two-wheel system. And first we're going to have a stationary primary wheel. This wheel is stationary. In tandem with this stationary wheel is this outer secondary wheel. Now this outer secondary wheel its purpose is to define and delimit the set days that keep with the traverse of each tropical year. So what that means is it's fluid. This wheel, this outer secondary wheel, is fluid. So we have our outer secondary wheel and our inner core primary wheel. Primary wheel doesn't move. The outer wheel is fluid. And it has to be, because this is the elliptical orbit around our sun. If we were just in a perfect circle around our sun, we wouldn't have the secondary wheel. And actually, the secondary wheel is described in further detail in Enoch chapter 72 in the gates and the portals. And that is the elliptical orbit around the sun that chapter is describing in great detail. So that's the secondary wheel, is that elliptical orbit. We're not a perfect 360. But there is a perfect core of 360 where all the feast days reside. So we start with this outer wheel. And this is where the seasons are distinguished. So we have spring in the east. We have summer in the south. We have autumn in the west. And then finally in the north, we have winter. And these are the first four that Enoch says comes in first. These are the first four that he says comes in to distinguish the seasons. This is where the calendar is fluid. Okay, so here in the middle at the spring equinox, we have the Great Gate. And this Great Gate is where the inner wheel and the outer wheel come together. They are joined here at this Great Gate. And so this is the spring equinox, where both of them align. Then Enoch tells us to count out 90 days, plus 1. That is the first quarter. So we count out, and the 91st day falls somewhere around here. So here we have our 91st day, because it doesn't quite come up to the summer solstice. And this period of time here is where the sun is turning around, and we have this gap of days between the two. It's just a few days in between here. And what we're told during this first part of this quarter is that all the days of the year come in. And at the end of that part in Enoch 82, where he's talking about the days that come in and the leaders and the captains, he talks about this other captain, this extra captain named Helo-Jasseph. And so Helo-Jasseph comes in at the end of the spring with all of the rest of the year. And he tells us that this extra captain, this extra day, comes in after all the seasons, after the 360, after the months, the weeks, the days. There's this extra little day that comes in the spring with the rest of them. Okay, so that's Helo-Jasseph. That's our 365th day that comes in the end, like the tail with all of the other days. Then we have our count continue. So we're continuing and we're counting from here our next 91 days. And so we're here. And this is the end of the second quarter. This is the summertime. And Enoch is telling us right in through here which gates come through, which months come through. He names the gates that come through. And he only gives us the names of the gates in the spring and the summer, because these 6 gates are the same gates that they come through in the fall and the winter. So he didn't need to rename the gates because they're the same gates. 2 months share a gate as the sun transverses through the heaven. So here we are at the 91st day of the second quarter. Now we're going to count, because what Enoch tells us at the end of this portion, after he tells us which gates are coming in through the summer, then he tells us that there's an extra captain at the end here that comes in with these gates. And this captain is named Asphael. Now, Asphael and Helo-Jasseph, Jasseph and Aspha, both come from the same root word that mean augmented. So these are augmented captains that come in. So this augmented day, this extra captain, this was the 365th day that came in the spring with all the rest of the days. But now at the end of summer, we get this other weird little captain that's going to come in named Asphael. And it's the 366th day. And Enoch tells us how to recognize it. And he says that when we get to the end of our count of our quarter, we start counting the days between the quarter end and the end of the season, or the beginning of the next season. The ending and the beginning would be the same, right? So it would be the end of summer, the first of fall. So when that happens, when we have the fall equinox here, how many days? If it's 5, then we know that it's a regular year. But every 4 years, we have the leap year, and it gives us 6 days in between. So when it's 6 days in between, we know it's the leap year, and that's when Asphael comes in. And that's what Mr. Dreyer calls the year that has the 5th node. When the 5th node comes in, we know the extra day named, the extra captain named Asphael has come in. And that's why we watch this time of year. And then we'll count, and we'll get to the winter solstice, and we'll have a few days in this quarter, and this is when the sun is just turning around here again. And it's made its trek as far south as it's going to go, and it starts heading north, and this is as far north as it's going to go. So then we come all the way back up here. The sun is turned around, and now we're approaching the end of the year and the beginning of the next year. And this is the great gate is happening here, because the 91st day of the end of the year, the 91st day of that last quarter of the 4th quarter, butts up right next to the first day. There's no gap.
And this is the Great Gate. It's the double Great Gate. And we have the last day and the first day butted right up. And Enoch tells us on this last night, on this 364th night of the linear year, of the linear solar year, the sun is setting itself up. The little sun is right here, and it's setting itself up, and it's getting ready to mark the equinox the next morning. So it's right in this fourth gate, leaving the third gate that evening as it's setting itself up, 9 parts and 9 parts. That night, it says that night of the 31st night, or the 91st night of the season, that 91st night, the last full day and night of winter, the sun is setting itself up, 9 parts and 9 parts. And then we have the first day of the year, and we start the count all over, and then the two wheels start separating. It's like two hands of the same clock, keeping time in Yahuwah's rhythm. This is Yahuwah's rhythm. This is his cycles. This is why this is the Great Gate, because the two are together, and then it starts to separate, and it tells us things. And we're to watch the second equinox of the year here, so we know whether we're in a regular year or a leap year. And this is just the basics of how the Creator's calendar works in the heavens and on earth, and as described as Enoch. So I hope this breaks it down, because these days in the center, the 360, are always set. They don't move. They are stationary. And so these outside 5 or 6 days are the fluid days because of our elliptical orbit around the sun. If we were a perfect circle, we wouldn't have any of this. And the seasons and the 91st days would all line up, so it would just be 360 days. But we have 365 days in a solar year. Now, somebody asked me, well, how can the equinox be the 365th day and the first day? And you got to realize we got two counts going on. We've got a linear solar year from equinox to equinox, which is 365 days. And then we have the Enochian count. And Enoch actually has the 365th day as the last day after the 52nd Sabbath. So in creation, there is a 365th day. But it's a different day than this linear 365th day. So the linear solar 365th day is the spring equinox. You've got to remember, this is the fourth day of creation. So the creation week spans this period of time here. Fourth day, the middle of the heaven, the sun is coming in. On the fifth day is the first full day of spring. And on this fifth day, which is called Tamayin, and it's the first full day of spring. And that's where the 360 is counted until we get all the way back around, and we come back and we exit back out and come back in. And that's how it works. Just like that, folks. That is the Creator's calendar right there. Perfect in every sense. So that's what we're doing this time of year while we're watching for the fall equinox, is to determine the space between the end of the quarter and the fall to know whether or not the 366th day has arrived. And we don't expect to see it this year because it did come in last year. Last year was the leap year, and so we'll have a few more years before we see it again. But we're told to count, and so we count, and we count every year. Even though we know pretty much what to expect, we are commanded to count. And so we watch, and we count, and we mark. And we mark the first of the year, and we count as instructed. And then Enoch gives us further instruction on how to break those counts down. But really the important thing is to mark the first of the year and count as instructed in Scripture.
Shalom, shalom.